Mage Storytime, Episode 25. Bad Dog, No Biscuit. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. After nearly having to fight one of the hellish princes of Mammon and destroying an entire nest of demon-worshipping vampires, we were pretty exhausted. We checked in with the local vampire court and were roundly thanked for taking care of the issue, but we spent most of the time resting and recuperating. Although Alwi, who worked for a local botanical garden, did have something odd to report. Apparently, a big corporate conglomerate that he had never heard of made a huge donation to his job, and even wanted to personally shake his hand for his astounding work ethic and service to the garden. Alwi was pretty much the golden boy at work, so this wasn't too far out of the ordinary, but it did seem odd that a corporation would single him out. Still, the corporate rep was nice, and they brought snacks, and it was 30 minutes no one else was bothering him, so he didn't mind. Office scuttlebutt was that either the company, Smith & Smith, or their parent company might be trying to buy the garden. Alwi kind of hated his bosses, so he was all in favor of selling, but unfortunately it wasn't his call. Around the same time, however, Weeb got an urgent message from our ally Coyote, whose node was at the same garden. He was visited in a dream by the spirit, who told him, "Listen, Doc, there's a bunch of mugs from the worm encroaching on my land." Behind him, Weeb could see a wooden palisade manned by various cartoon characters with muskets and cannon. A large billowing flag read, "Don't tread on me," above a picture of a carrot. Weeb was all in with helping our good friend, and promised to relay the information to the rest of us when he woke up. Which he did, causing some serious concern among the group. Who or what would be powerful enough to take on a trickster that big? That was the topic of conversation when we next met at our mall shop / base of operations. At least, that was the conversation as we met up in the parking lot and started walking in. We stopped suddenly when we saw a man in an expensive-looking business suit standing in front of our door. Well, Bard thought any suit was fancy, but he was kind of a slob. The man was pale, but not to the point of being a vampire, and had a neatly trimmed red beard and groomed hair. He looked the very image of business professionalism. He greeted us politely when we walked up. He asked if we were the Iron Goldfish, to Weeb responded, "Who wants to know?" It seemed a bit silly since we were in a mostly abandoned mall, approaching the store with our name on it. Kitty slowly closed his jacket over his Iron Goldfish shirt. Tello rolled her eyes and just said yes. "Excellent. My name is John McJude. I represent a certain multinational conglomerate that you may have heard of, or at least some of our subsidiaries. Does the greeting card company Passage Brand ring a bell?" We nodded, impressed, and he continued. "My employer has recently decided to expand their greeting card business into something that sells tchotchkes and ornaments and other bric-a-brac, and word is that your small business makes some of the best around. We would be interested in buying you out." By this time we had welcomed him into the store, which conveniently allowed him to place his briefcase on the table and open it where we could see the piled stacks of cash inside. Bard started to drool. He wasn't alone. The offer was tempting, to say the least, and he sweetened it by offering us positions in the larger company. We could even keep running our little store if we really wanted to. We would just be a small part of the corporate family. Then Tello sent a group text that helpfully reminded the greedier of us that we could literally make gold from base metal. We had the ultimate secret to riches and really didn't need this guy. Subsequently, when we balked at his initial offer of $100,000 each, we thought he would be surprised. Instead, he said, "Well, why don't I just add a 0 here and see how that figure strikes you?" It struck pretty hard, and Bard, who had never even dreamed of that much money, had to be physically taken into another room for a few deep breaths and a lie down. Everyone else had more sense, and politely rejected his offer, although we were potentially open to negotiation in the future, after we'd finished our current expansion to the second location in Frisco. We asked for a contract or proposal that we could send to our business vampires and Law Ninja. Okay, we didn't have Law Ninja, but we were working on it. Actually, when we politely got rid of the guy, Tella pointed out that this company trying, with some desperation apparently, to get our business and the accompanying nodes, might also be trying to get some other node through the power of cold, hard cash. It seemed unlikely. Passage Brand made cards and Smith & Smith made soap and household products. But none of us knew much about corporate life or business, so it was possible they were somehow connected. Just to be safe, we got on the phone and checked with the comic shop and our werewolf friends, but no one seemed to be moving on their nodes. At least, not yet, but we told them to keep an eye out. For the angry werewolf pack, we just left a nice note nailed to a tree at the park where they had gathered, but our spirit world contacts confirmed that they had received the warning. The friendly werewolf pack told us that someone had bought up the parkland in the southern suburb where there was a node next to a dump, which had formerly belonged to some evil werewolves who tried to destroy our souls before we escaped and sicked the good werewolves on them. They were looking to build something like a housing development or something that seemed, not evil. Maybe not benevolent, but not exactly evil, so we weren't sure. The wolves said that they were currently enacting a campaign of sabotage and didn't really need our help, but they thanked us for the offer. We liked these werewolves. They were good boys. And girls. Still, their efforts sounded fairly likely to result in loss of life, which, as the designated good guys, we were supposed to be against, at least according to our charter. Luckily, we had some experience making fake bodies. Telo had a background in anthropology and so directed our efforts. All it took was a few magic spells to make an appropriate-looking skeleton, after which all we aged it with time magic. And then we had ourselves a genuine replica Native American corpse, suitable for turning an innocent, meaningless park into a hidden Native American burial ground, with all the legal rights and protections accompanying that designation. We snuck out to the park in the middle of the night and inhumed our corpse, after which we manipulated the ground to make it appear normal and undisturbed. Then we called a news channel with an anonymous tip. And with that, the entire project ground to a halt. Local anthropologists and archaeologists were flabbergasted by the presence of this body, and the artifacts that we had created, aged, and planted next to it. It really made a big stir in the academic community. We felt good for giving these guys a little excitement in their otherwise humdrum lives. The schemes of the worm, we assumed, foiled in this instance, we returned back to the shop to plan our next sortie, or to find more allies, or to do anything, really. We weren't even 100% sure we were actually under attack, but our paranoia was in control, so we didn't really care. It was about this time that we got a call from our vampire accountants, who helpfully informed us that someone was trying to sabotage our business again, hitting us with fines and fees and unknown regulations, much like how the technocracy had done previously. We made a phone call and confirmed it wasn't them. But the accountants knew who it really was who was attacking us. It was the same company that had tried to buy us out, a multinational conglomerate named Pentex. They had started as an oil company before moving into the business of business, and now had their fingers in just about everything. They owned both Smith & Smith and Passage Brand, thereby confirming our suspicions. We asked if the vamps had any feelings or thoughts about the company, and were told it was quite possibly the second most evil company in the entire world. Behind Disney, of course. That sent a chill down our spines. Anyone powerful enough to tangle with the mouse was a real threat. They told us that Pentex was on an equal footing with the entire technocracy, although it was more officially evil, according to our technocrat contacts anyway. We asked for their advice on dealing with the company, and the vampires simply said, "Sell out, and then run as far and fast as you can and live out your remaining days in luxury. This company is too big for you to fight." We took that as a challenge, but we did thank them for the information and hung up. The next day, Aoi and Kitty got a call from their father. Their paternal grandparents' house had burned down. The grandparents were hospitalized for smoke inhalation and some burns, and no one knew how the fire started. Later in the day, Aoi got a call from John McJude asking if everything was okay. He had heard about the fire and was concerned. He thought maybe the money provided by the deal would be able to help the Aoi Kitty family through their difficult times. He was a bit puzzled when Kitty informed him that everything was fine and things were good. You see, McJude didn't know that Kitty and Alwee hated their racist, thieving grandparents, and were happy that they were destitute and homeless. Families, man. Anyway, McJude hung up, confused, and the brothers informed the rest of us that it seemed that Pentex wanted to play hardball. Fortunately, they hadn't done their research, so the shot missed. In fact, in gratitude, Kitty and Alwee declared a moratorium on plotting against Pentex. For the afternoon, at least, while they threw an impromptu party. Still, that meant we suddenly had to deal with this group, and do it quickly before they targeted someone we actually liked. We thought there might be a chance that the technocracy would help, since they and Pentex seemed to be at ideological odds, stasis versus destruction, respectively. To get a hold of them, Weeb just picked up our store phone and, without dialing anything, left a message for the technocrats on the assumption that our phones, store, and possibly homes were bugged. That was how we normally did it. The next morning, there was a clone of Kevin standing in front of our store. We welcomed him in and informed him of Pentex's actions and the company's attempt to purchase nodes, presumably for the worm. The technocrat thanked us for the information and suggested that we could keep the magical power sources safe by selling to them. That way we would have the might of the technocracy on our side and wouldn't have to fear. We countered with an offer to help fight the wormlings, and the suit said maybe. He did like the idea of an expendable goon squad. We would have been insulted by that description, but it was honestly how we've been marketing ourselves in the magical community. We even had it on our business cards. Ultimately, we wouldn't come to an arrangement with the technocracy, but they seemed generally supportive, and the agent said we could contact him if we had specific plans or actions going on. And for the right price, they might help. Regardless, they appreciated the information and would start to meet Pentex's movements on other fronts. As we were talking to the clone Kevin, McJude stepped through the door. He greeted us warmly and asked if maybe we had reconsidered his proposal. He immediately marked the clone as a representative of several status quo favoring organizations, and the two glared at each other in a businesslike manner. Several more veiled threats were made, and Alwee decided he had had enough. He whipped out his phone and told us all he was making a save point. Then, as McJude and Kevin stared in confusion, and the rest of us started to get concerned, Alwee pulled his pistol out and shot McJude right in the chest. He dropped, but after a pained groan started back to his feet, apparently none the worse for wear. "Unfortunate that things had to go this way," he said slowly. "Security!" With his shout, 4 goons entered the store. We could tell they were goons because they sported heavy muscles, compact bodies, and ugly faces that spelled goon the world over. The other thing they had in common was that they were all ugly, sporting a collection of cauliflower ears, scars, monobrows, and generally looking like losers in the genetic lottery. We weren't intimidated by a handful of thugs, though. At least, we weren't until they started suddenly sprouting extra hair, muscles, and height. Werewolves. Now we were intimidated, especially as they were close enough to quickly turn us all into chunky salsa. Handy started to freak out, unable to cope with the horror of the werewolves in front of him. He vanished in a magical puff, and we found out later he had taken an impromptu vacation in Italy. We checked later, once we convinced him to come back, and it turned out he was suffering from some sort of fear aura that werewolves naturally generate. The rest of us were made of sterner stuff and managed to fight through our terror. At least, that's what we told him. Weeb and Bard reacted first, and they quickly assumed their Space Marine and superhero forms, hoping that power would be enough to take on the 9-foot-tall murder machines. Critical, however, was the first to really act. He leaned over to one of the werewolves and, in a stage whisper, commanded him to fight your brethren, putting his magical will to the statement and putting a geesh on the wolf. Fortunately, werewolves are a notoriously angry bunch, and it didn't take too much to convince them to start brawling, so we had a surprise ally. The furry guy turned and immediately swiped at his comrade's torso, clawing a huge gash into his abdomen out of which purplish and reddish things, presumably his intestines, started to fall. Inspired by the turning tables, Weeb ran up and, with his magically enhanced muscles, punched a werewolf in the face. This would normally not be a suggested method of dealing with werewolves, but he made it work. The wolf rocked back a step, but didn't seem affected otherwise. Bard attempted to do the same and got a much similar response from his opponent. Once Kitty ran over and slapped strength-enhancing stickers on the fighters' backs, however, the werewolves started to feel the blows a little more. They tried to claw our frontline fighters, but they were too nimble for him. That was a good thing, as those claws looked sharp, and probably could have disemboweled either of our party members with a single swipe. For his part, our technocratic friend Kevin ran for cover, then popped up from time to fire off a few shots. It wasn't really his fight, and he didn't do much, but we appreciated the sentiment. Della's attack was a lot more potent. Using matter and correspondence, she rang a small silver gong we had on one of the tables, causing the silver ions to vibrate off it and shoot out at the werewolves. She caught two of them in a choking cloud of the stuff, and they started clawing at their faces and eyes in evident pain. They started thrashing and stumbling around until they collided with one another. It seems both took offense to this bad touch, as they started to growl and snarl at one another, quickly devolving into blows in their stunned, angry states. It only took a few strikes from each for both to go down in a pool of their own blood. For his part, since the start of the fight, Alwi had been storing time on his phone. The only reason he was so slow to act was that his phone took a long time to load the Cronus magic. But he finally heard a ding and, hitting a button, launched himself into action. Time slowed to a crawl around Alwi as he called on his training as the new Black Panther and attacked. Taking advantage of the slowed time, and of his predilection for dirty fighting, Alwi basically turned one werewolf's testicles into small speed bags, unloading blow after blow on him in the altered time stream. Back in normal time, we saw a blur race over to the werewolf, then plant itself in front of him and start hammering away at his crotch. The werewolf let out a shriek audible only to dogs, and, clutching his decimated testicles, he fell to the ground in a heap. Unfortunately for us, Alwi had not been paying much attention while his phone had been loading, since he had been willing the little loading bar to go faster. He didn't know that Critical had forced one of the werewolves onto our side, meaning that he had taken out our erstwhile ally. Having chosen this moment to overcome his fear, Handy reappeared from the back room, where his portal had dropped him. He took in the situation and decided that there were still too many werewolves in the room. Seeking to resolve this problem, he opened a portal behind one of the werewolves, which started to suck him in. The sucking was new and confusing to most of us, and especially to the wolf, who couldn't keep his footing and fell in. Handy later told us that the suction was a result of all the atmosphere rushing out from our store and into the void. He had sent the werewolf to the moon, appropriately enough. Well, that was probably an exaggeration. Handy's magic couldn't reach all the way to the moon, so he just dropped the werewolf into the near-Earth orbit. Either the lack of oxygen or the fiery re-entry should handle him. That only left one orangish werewolf left, John McJude. The super-strong weeb turned to McJude and took a swing with the power claws that suddenly jutted from his armor, but the wolf dodged in time. The furboy returned the swing, but Weeb caught the arm and returned with an uppercut that would have removed the head from a normal man. As the wolf staggered back, Weeb grabbed at his face in a bid to capture and subdue him, but the wolf dodged once again. This time, however, he dodged right into the path of Bard, who hit him with a flying, literally, superpowered tackle, audibly breaking several bones and knocking the werewolf to the ground. As Weeb and Bard struggled to hold him down, Kitty walked over calmly and slapped a single sticker right on the werewolf's forehead, causing the body to go limp and lie still. The sticker, which Kitty had had on hand for just such an emergency, but which he hadn't gotten to use yet, forcibly removed the soul from its body and kept them separate. Bard, Critical, and Tello reached out with their spirit magic and placed a spectral cage around the werewolf's soul, just in case. Now the fight was over, and we had to figure out something to do with the werewolf bodies. Well, body, since the dead ones had reverted back to their human form. Although we did contemplate sending NASA an update about the werewolf satellite. We weren't 100% sure it was dead. We suggested giving the technically living werewolf and his soul to Archimedes to practice taxidermy on. Maybe make him into a living rug to match our toilet seat cover. We shouted these threats to empty air, but the party members with spirit sight insisted that McJude's soul could hear it, and was ranting about how his masters would destroy us. This disinclined us to return him to his body. Instead, we decided to get some other spirit to inhabit it. After much arguing, we settled on the Dark Knight. His mind and training in a werewolf's body, owing it all to us. We were sure he would make a powerful ally, and our world could honestly use some more bat-themed heroes in it. Kevin the Technocrat thought it sounded like a good idea. We hadn't consulted him so much as forgotten he was there, but it was good to have technocratic approval for our nefarious deeds. Of course, maybe he was only agreeing because he was afraid of the people who killed a bunch of werewolves, but he agreed anyway. Although he did ask to leave before we openly practiced our reality deviance. We weren't exactly enemies anymore, but it wouldn't do to have an official agent party to some of this nonsense. After he left, we got out the instruments of torture, spectral and physical, and set about pumping McJude for information. There were a lot of veiled and not-so-veiled threats about what Pentex would do to us. We did get him to admit that the corporation worked with the Worm and the Nefandi, however. They were mostly after our nodes, but we had shown up on their radar when we started patching the hole in the underworld, and then kept interfering with their agents, preventing some of their attempts to change the world more to their liking. After a bit more pressing, and It's a Small World played on loop for 30 minutes, he was willing to tell us that the Worm, the Nefandi, and the Demon Worshippers were all working together to bring about the end of days and destroy the world. When we asked why he would want to do that, since he would also get destroyed in the process, he said something about killing everybody else and remaking the world in his image, with him and his allies on top of the new order. It wouldn't take much more since, according to him anyway, the Worm already owned most of the world. After all, greed and hatred were everywhere. We wanted to disagree, but really couldn't. Apparently the other destructive factions had similar ideas, and were all planning to backstab one another once the world was ended. The demons wanted out from their cage in the underworld, while Pentex wanted to release them to burn down the world. No one was certain what the Star Squid wanted, other than destruction, but their cultists were good workers, so they got along okay. We thought it all sounded like a terrible plan that was doomed to fail. Not because it was evil, but because dividing everyone into the world into categories of kill and kill later didn't really foster a cooperative work environment. McJude called us idiots, but we pointed out that we weren't the ones missing our bodies. He stopped talking after that. Kitty summoned his ally, Baron Samedi, and although the man wasn't technically dead, the psychopomp agreed to take him away. So with that, we set about cleaning up our store and putting more booby traps on it than the Qin Emperor's tomb. I pity the customer that came to our store on accident. Fortunately, that never seemed to be an issue. What are the forces of the Worm up to? Where will the next attack come from? And will Pentex make another attempt on our heroes? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.